what kind of people should be considering using this money. I know that you have the current of Bloomberg house view of this is that it's really for criminals, for people who are looking to escape sanctions, terrorists, or anyone under sanctions essentially to use Bitcoin, right? But who else? Who else could use such money?
Well, I want to focus on the criminals thing. Bitcoin is for criminals. Bitcoin is useful for drug dealers and human traffickers and terrorists and for some of those who wish to evade sanctions. But it's important not to pass over that category and pretend that all criminals are bad. Bitcoin is also useful for other kinds of criminals. Criminals like Alexei Navalny, a dissident politician and journalist who fought Putin's regime to the end and died in prison. But his life was funded by donations made to him in Bitcoin. Of course, his bank accounts were shut down long ago, and Putin blocked any of his access to any financial rails. But he still was able to receive donations and operate because he had Bitcoin. Edward Snowden, Bitcoiner. Roy Mahbub, who was a software engineer in Afghanistan, had a team of women working for her, mostly for foreign clients, who wanted to pay them digitally. But if they did it with bank transfers, then the husbands of these women would simply take the money. So what did they use? Bitcoin, probably in ways that were against the law. They're not allowed to have bank accounts of their own. It's in their husband's name. They broke social norms and maybe even legal rules to take payments themselves. So when we say Bitcoin is for criminals, that's the opening line of this book. In fact, Bitcoin is for criminals. We think it's important to remember there are good criminals and there are bad criminals. Mm-hmm. Not all laws are just. Jesus Christ was a criminal. So is Donald Trump. Many different people are criminals. And it's kind of an easy and shallow way to dismiss Bitcoin if you just say Bitcoin is for criminals. Because you have to notice that some criminals are actually doing the right thing and that the law is the problem, not the criminal. Now, this is not a popular message in Singapore. We tend to be law-abiding, law-respecting people here. But it is my message, nonetheless, that some laws are unjust, and it is good that we have money available for at least some of the people who resist those unjust laws.
Yep. And perhaps the other question would be, other than those which we would call maybe part of the resistance, mm-hmm. right? You also make the case that it is also for those who might be financially disenfranchised.
That's
or
right.
Economically underserved. In what way would Bitcoin serve them?
Billions of people around the world suffer under local, state-run money regimes that are quite poorly managed. Now, we're pretty lucky. We live in Singapore. Yeah. The Singapore dollar is pretty good. The US dollar is pretty good. Most people don't have access to the Singapore dollar or US dollar, especially in digital form. So they're left to the whims of local and often corrupt central banks who will inflate away their savings and sometimes even overnight deplete the bank deposits of any value whatsoever just by printing a bunch more money or irresponsibly managing deposits in other ways. This is a total disaster when the purchasing power of your money drops by 50% in a month. That's the definition of hyperinflation. Total disaster. Not only does it make it hard to economically plan, so it's bad for capital formation, it's even worse for those who are least well off, who all they had was some cash and maybe some perishable material goods. They got the food in their house and some cash, and that's it. This person is absolutely screwed by irresponsible central banks. But thanks to Bitcoin, they have an exit option, especially for long-term savings. So Bitcoin is notoriously volatile in the short run, but also notoriously not volatile in the long run. It's there's a smoother line that looks like it's going in the right direction. And for many of these people, Bitcoin has been a lifesaver. You buy a little Bitcoin for cash and then just hold it, and that is your fortress, that is your base, that is your family nest egg that will not be depleted overnight by an irresponsible or malicious central bank. So there's someone who's not a criminal, who's not a drug dealer, they're not even a resistance freedom fighter in Russia, just an ordinary farmer in Venezuela who wants to save and who doesn't have the tools to do so without Bitcoin. So that's someone who Bitcoin serves. And notice that Bitcoin can do this for someone no matter where they are because it's that global digital phenomenon. Now, US dollars have sometimes served in this role, especially physical US dollars. So I like physical cash, especially US dollars. It's probably America's finest export. We export a lot of dubious cultural stuff and even more dubious war stuff. But some of the good stuff we export is physical US dollars. But not everybody has access to those. And in places where banks impose strict withdrawal and deposit limits, it's even harder to get access to physical US dollars. So Bitcoin is for those people.
But in those cases, would Bitcoin actually be accessible to them, do you think?
All it takes is a smartphone between $50 and $100 US dollars in value. And that is going down over time. So the trend of internet access is basically straight up and to the right. And the trend of how much it costs to have a phone that can run Bitcoin is going down and to the right over time. So these trends are powerful, seemingly inexorable. Nobody's found a way to stop them. Nobody really wants to stop them. And they're going in the right direction for making it easier and easier for the globally least well-off to have access to Bitcoin. So that's a way in which our world is getting better. It's easy to be a pessimist about this kind of stuff, but those trend lines are potent and they're making the world better.
Yep. And in your book, you also talk about how to actually conceptualize a world, how a world of Bitcoin will look like. And you talk about specifically the veil of ignorance, why you needed the veil of ignorance to understand or evaluate Bitcoin's usefulness to the world. I'd like to ask, why should one, even put on the veil of ignorance? Why can't we just take the world as it is today and then say, Bitcoin is good or Bitcoin is bad?
It's really tempting to replace the question, is Bitcoin good, with this question, is Bitcoin good for me?
Yeah.
And then I think about, well, do I have some? Is it going to pump? Is it going to dump? That is, raise or lower in purchasing power. And that's not really a very responsible way to think about a technology and whether we should want it to have it in the world or not. You've got to think about it in some more neutral, global way. So the way we propose in the book to do this is to remember everything you know about the world, about the ways in which it's fair and unfair, about the distribution of resources, about institutions and which ones are good and which ones are bad, responsible or not. All of that, remember, but just forget one thing, or pretend that you forget it. It's a thought experiment. Forget who you are. So imagine that you could wake up, you take this little pill, and when you wake up, you'll wake up as some person, but you don't know which person that will be. It could be our Venezuelan farmer. It could be Alexei Navalny, languishing in Russian prison, although he died recently. Up until recently, you could have been him. You could have been a CEO in the United States. You could be an NS man in the back of a sweaty truck. You don't know. And then ask this question: would I want Bitcoin to be there when I wake up, not knowing who I'd be? And we think this is a useful question to ask because then it helps us focus on not whether Bitcoin is good for us, but whether Bitcoin is good for humanity and for who within humanity Bitcoin might be good for. And the argument we make is that based on the empirical facts, so you can't just do this with pure philosophy, you actually have to investigate to see what the world is actually like to answer this question. It looks like Bitcoin, of course, harms some people and benefits others, but the benefits accrue especially to the least well-off, those people who would otherwise be absolutely screwed by their local institutions, or who would have no way of making payments because they'd be blockaded by local authoritarians. Bitcoin is for them.